From the Lincoln Journal-Star, this is the Life in the Red podcast with Luke Mullin and Brent Wagner.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin here today, joined by Brent Wagner. And Brent, we got to come on and break down really one of the biggest stories in Nebraska athletics in the last several years. John Cook, legendary national title winning volleyball coach, calling it a day, riding off into the sunset. Pretty stunning for people to hear that. And, it was about 2 weeks ago, January 29th. It was kind of a surprise shock announcement, I think, for most people. But, obviously he was 68. He's getting up there, 25 years at Nebraska. What, from what he said, just what was your initial reaction and what made it right for him to call it quits at this point?
Yeah, I think some of the surprise is that he doesn't look 68 years old, right? He takes care of himself. And so I think that was some of it. But certainly, like 68 years old, he'd kind of been telling recruits now recently, I may not be there all of your 4 years, but I'll be there at the start of your career. So it was coming closer, I think. He feels really good about where the program is, and that just like when he took over, he had a really good transition. They won the national championship his first year as head coach. Feels like the program's in a really good spot. He's really excited about things that he can do now to help out the athletic department, mentor coaches, help raise money for all the projects that need to have happen. He'll still be active. He speaks a lot. He travels the state, gives leadership talks to agriculture groups, insurance groups, things like that. So you'll still see him around, and might be able to do that more nationally. I'm sure he'll be an in-demand speaker. He's kind of excited about this next chapter, I think.
Yeah, and I mean that's huge for Nebraska, obviously, to not lose somebody like John Cook around the program, because it's not just volleyball. I mean, he's been such a big part of that athletic department, and all the sorts of positive impacts. He was part of that with 1890. The NIL funds, raising that for the volleyball team. So much instrumental, and that fundraising role, I think that will suit him very well. And have time, of course, for all of his passions out there, rodeo, get back to it. But I think, part of the surprising thing for people too is, he'd been talking about how much fun he'd been having coaching, right? I mean, some of these teams, this is some of the most fun he said. And, you have such an elite, competitor at this highest level. They were so close those last 2 years, falling short. It's like, well, a lot of people like to go out on top, but when you coach 32 years, won 4 national titles, been to 12 Final Fours, I think there were a lot of good accolades in there still. It was still the right time, even after those 2 close calls these last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's no doubt that he would have loved to win another national championship, but that's a 325 day a year pursuit. And then the other 20 days, you might have to work a little bit too. Things come up, but they won the Big Ten championship. Big Ten championships mean a whole lot to him. So they went out with another Big Ten championship. Obviously the sellout streak is going on. They had the stadium match last year. I mean, he kind of said it like there wasn't a whole lot left out there, maybe than another national championship. And like I said, feels really good about where the program's at. Feels, they're a pretty veteran team coming back this year. So they're set up to continue to be successful for years to come, I think.
Yep. Very, very much so valid. And that legacy, I mentioned, of course, the national titles, but 9 Big Ten titles, or 9 Big 12 titles, 5 Big Ten championships since Nebraska moved to that conference. His career record, 722 and 103, 87.5% winning percentage. Yeah, that's pretty good at Nebraska. But I think just overall his legacy, obviously the national title wins, those didn't come overnight, but just gradually raising the profile of Nebraska volleyball and building into what it is today, a national powerhouse who's a brand that anybody who follows college volleyball knows. I mean, that's going to be his legacy here.
Yeah, it was really interesting in that the press conference he had the day after the announcement. There wasn't a whole lot of talk about national championships. It was what he's done for women's sports, what he's done for volleyball, just how he's he's raised the bar at colleges all across the country. What can we do to get closer to Nebraska volleyball? How can we be our own version of Nebraska volleyball? Obviously, all the All-American players is part of the legacy, but yeah, like at Stanford, when their coach retired, it was about the championships, and here it was a lot more. It was the fans, it was the high school volleyball in the state, it was the other programs in the state. Creighton's doing well, Omaha's doing well, the small colleges. So it's something that he took from Terry Pettit and then just continued to expand on it for the past 25 years.
Yep, that impact's going to be felt a long time here down the future, most certainly. And, as Nebraska kind of turns the page, then obviously you have that shock, right? Okay, Cook's retiring. There's always going to be the, what's next. And when you have, a national title winning program, doesn't matter what sport it is, if we're talking UConn women's basketball, Alabama football, all these, premier programs, you think, okay, coach retires, you're going to have like this long, national recruiting search. That was not the case here. Cook knew who he wanted. Athletic director Troy Dannon knew who he wanted. And Dani Busboom Kelly, former Nebraska player, former Nebraska assistant, she's coming back. Obviously the familiarity with the program is huge, but with the job that she did at Louisville too, how big was that factoring into, let's get somebody who's not unproven, somebody who's shown she can go to the Final Fours. She knows the program. She knows what it takes to win in Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of lined up. I mean, John Cook would have loved for a former player of his to follow him at Nebraska, but also at a program at Nebraska, you aspire to have somebody who is, been really successful, probably reached a Final Four. And then she was able to do that a couple of years ago. She's won conference championships. So, I mean, Troy Dannon said it several times. I mean, yeah, she was from Nebraska, but she was also, would have been one of the top targets. And if you think about it, there's only so many active coaches that have won national championships. And, those are all interesting cases because those are all your rivals. That's Texas, that's Wisconsin, that's Penn State. So it's kind of an interesting situation. But yeah, she was successful. She proved that she could do what it takes. She could recruit at a high level high school. She could recruit transfers. She got some impact transfers while she was at Louisville. And then this year, the pressure of having the Final Four in Louisville, and then they got there too. And, maybe if they don't have one of the top players doesn't get injured, they might have won the national championship. So everything kind of lined up here in the last few years.
Yep. And during her 8 years at Louisville, 8 consecutive NCAA tournament appearances, she made 4 Final Fours there. So super impressive track record there as a head coach. And then when it comes to the money, the contract, John Cook, obviously veteran, you have that experience, track record, and pedigree. His last extension, he was making $825,000 a year. Dani Busboom Kelly starting off at $700,000, but with yearly raises, she'll get there. Don't worry. By the end of 2031, that is her first Nebraska contract. But in terms of her, coming back to this school that obviously she has a lot of memories at, that was probably part of the reaction from her, that initial press conference. But there's a lot of expectations, and pressure that's going to come with that job too. Just what did you hear from her in that press conference about how she's looking forward to this job and how she's going to approach it too?
I mean, she's gained a lot of experience. She's been here as a player. She came back as an assistant coach. She was, I would say she kind of started the recruiting momentum that Nebraska's had over the last 10, 12 years. She saw and was kind of part of all the tough decisions that John had to make as a head coach. Then she went down to Louisville and did it herself, using some of the things she learned from him, but then adding her own mix. And now she'll come back and take all those experiences and kind of tweak a few things, but a lot of it'll stay the same, I think. And she knows recruiting is going to be a huge part of that. That was one of the big things she's emphasized is recruiting and the relationships with the players.
Yeah. And I mean, if we talk about the scale, the attention that Nebraska volleyball gets, I mean, just look at Dani Busboom Kelly's introductory press conference. I mean, I don't know what it was like for John John Cook, 25 years ago, but I can't imagine it was as much heralded, as much news coverage, and as much attention as Dani Busboom Kelly had on that day.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. They usually don't open up these things to public like this, for basketball coaches or things like that. But it was also kind of symbolic of what the program has done over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years. They moved from the Coliseum to the Devaney Center so that more fans could be a part of the program. They had the stadium match so that more fans could be a part of the program. They go on these trips. They play these spring matches across the state so that more people can be a part of it. And then, they opened up this introductory event to everybody so that, more people could be a part of it. I mean, there was probably somebody there who couldn't attend a match this year just because you can't get tickets who was at that event, and they'll remember that. And then also a really big part of it was, Dani's from the area, Cortland, Adams, Freeman Public Schools, and they were all able to come be a part of that. Just a huge source of pride for that community, and they were able to fill up the bleachers and be a part of that day too.
Yeah, I mean, very cool celebration of the program. And as we kind of talk about moving forward, wrapping up this big change for Nebraska volleyball, what was so huge is the roster staying together, because you have that happen, right? Coaching change, uncertainty, some players might want to move on. That was something that was very important to John Cook, with making that decision. And just the players, staying together, the assistant coaches as well. We knew Jordan Larson had decided to move on. That news had come out, but as well, just all sorts of the consistency there. How important is that going to be for Nebraska volleyball moving forward? That it's really not a rebuild. It's just a kind of a continuation with a new, different head coach in charge.
Yeah, it's extremely unique. Think about when a football coach comes in, there's massive staff changeover, massive player turnover. And, this was just really unique because, she knew Kelly Hunter. Jalen and Dani had just coached together at a USA event, a couple of weeks ago. So they knew each other. Just all kind of lined up. Dan Meskey took over for her at Louisville, and I think some of the staff stayed the same there, so it wasn't like she wanted to bring some coaches with her, at least initially. So it all lined up where you can set yourself up to have a really good first season.
Yeah, and I mean, really, this is as John Cook has built this program up, this is a program that expects really to compete for Big Ten titles, national titles, and with all the talent that they have coming back, the Harper Murray, Andy Jackson, that core that they have, super talented freshman class coming in. They added Ali Check out of the transfer portal. Expectations were always going to be high for this team, but with no John Cook, does it change at all? Obviously they're still high achievers, but is there maybe kind of that element of uncertainty now with that coaching change? I know it's a long way away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think she would definitely tell you, that the expectation is to have a chance to win the Big Ten championship, get to the Final Four, and put yourself in position, to have a chance to win the national championship. That's, that was what John Cook always said. No matter what, if we're old, if we're young, let's give ourselves a chance to compete for the national championship. He never backed down from that. Wasn't afraid to say it publicly. Some people are afraid to say that publicly. He says everybody's thinking it anyway, so let's just put it out there and go for it. And I think that would be the same case with her. I mean, she was in position to win a national championship with, probably not the same amount of resources, not the ability to get the same type of recruits, at least out of high school. So yeah, I think they're definitely aiming big, but there's lots of other programs that are aiming big too. Pittsburgh's aiming big. Texas is aiming big. Wisconsin, a little younger, but yeah, all those teams are trying to win national championships too.
Yeah, well, it might change the path a little bit, but doesn't change the destination. Yep, there's some wisdom from me here on the podcast today. But yeah, definitely big things as always expected out of this Nebraska volleyball program, and I think certainly transition from John Cook to Dani Busboom Kelly. We'll continue to cover that here. One of the big stories in Nebraska athletics. Thanks again to Brent for joining me on the podcast today. A few other updates to get to you from around Nebraska athletics, starting with Husker hoops. Women's basketball in a really tough stretch right now. Lost 3 in a row, 4 of its last 5. But these next 2 games that are coming up, yes, you look at those last few and the struggles that they're going through, about 60 points a game, need to figure out that scoring. But at Maryland on Thursday night, at Illinois on Sunday, both those teams 9-4 in the conference, 19-5 overall. Nebraska, they're 16-8, 7-6 in the Big Ten. I mean, those are 2 games that very easily could break either way. I think Nebraska needs to win one of those 2 to stabilize its season. So big week on the way for Nebraska women's hoops. Whereas the men's basketball team, I think legitimately, I got an apology to make. Last time, I mean, me and Amy, we were sitting here, we're saying this team doesn't know how to win. Did Fred Hoiberg get this roster wrong? Remember, they lost 6 in a row at that point, so give us a little grace. But yeah, they're looking a lot better right now. I got to admit, Fred Hoiberg, he's got this team figured out. Really, I mean, those gritty ranked wins at home, they beat Illinois, then on the road at Oregon, beat Washington, beat Ohio State. I think the scoring's really come along. That was a concern that we've always had. Where's the scoring going to come from? Nebraska getting it from all angles. Berke Buchtengel played really well. He's getting a little dinged up at the moment, but he's had some big moments for this team. That entire starting lineup, I think, really has solidified themselves. And when you look at the scope of those big wins, well, NCAA tournament's back in play. Current projections have Nebraska there on that 11 seed line, and not even as one of those last Final Four teams in, depending on the bracketology that you look at. And going forward for Nebraska, the record 16-8, 6-7 in Big Ten play. Most of the experts say about 19 wins should lock them into the tournament, 20 if you really want to be secure. So a lot to play for over these next couple weeks for Nebraska. And the 2 games coming up, they host Maryland this Thursday night, then they will travel to Northwestern on Sunday. Another couple winnable games for this Nebraska team that is playing with its hair on fire right now. That's your Husker Hoops update. Continuing to run through our different sports. Football, yes, we still got some football updates for you here in February. Mike Eckler, Nebraska has its next special teams coordinator, former Husker assistant, former Blair High standout from within the state. He'd most recently been at Tennessee and kind of had been all over. He was a Nebraska assistant under Bo Pelini for 3 years, coached the linebackers during that tenure, had jumped to several different colleges since then, but really where he landed most recently at Tennessee, his most successful stint yet, coaching those linebackers in addition to the special teams. Here in Nebraska, he will just coach special teams, but at Tennessee, consistently among the nation's best punt return units, had some dramatic improvements just in his first year with the program. That's something Nebraska will need. Remember, these Huskers, they were bottom 20 in special teams efficiency last year. Going to have a lot of new guys as well, new starters there at punter and long snapper. Some things to work out as well. And what that means for Nebraska, too, current expectation from sources around the program is that Ed Foley, he's going to move into a new role as the director of football relations. That's a role that works with high school coaches, high school recruits, gets visits scheduled up, is very much kind of that front man that people can look to with all sorts of recruiting questions. CJ Cavazos held that role in 23. Troy Vincent held it last year. And special teams coordinator, as Matt Rule said on February 1st, he said he didn't anticipate that it would be a recruiting role. That would seem to line up, again, if Eckler can just focus on those special teams, fully there serving in that recruiting role. That's the expectation for the Nebraska coaching staff as well. Defensive line coach Terry Bradden just finished his Super Bowl coaching run with the Chiefs. He will be here in Lincoln soon to get started with that Nebraska job that he has landed. And this was also an update a couple weeks ago. Offensive lineman Rocco Spindler, Notre Dame transfer. He was looking at a couple different schools, but he is headed to Nebraska. And it really makes, an interesting mix on this offensive line for next season. You land Elijah Pritchett, that big tackle transfer, Spindler, the guard transfer, several returning starters from this team. You have those tackles, Corcoran and Prohaska coming back. A lot to like about that depth of the offensive line. Spindler, you think he's going to be a starter, certainly, after what he did for Notre Dame during that national championship run this season. And Huskers on to 2026 recruiting. They hosted a big junior day most recently. Not expecting a lot of commits, a lot of traction in terms of until March, April, official visits happen, but that is very much ongoing. Nebraska, they'll be back at it, recruiting heavily here these next couple weeks, and as well, winter workouts ongoing here at the facility in Lincoln. And onto our spring sports. Husker baseball starts this week. Number 24 Huskers, they will face UC Irvine, number 16 Vanderbilt, and San Diego State down in Arizona this weekend. Whereas Nebraska softball, they already began their year, went 3-2 during the season opening tournament in Florida, got some big time pitching out of Jordy Ball. I think all Nebraska fans were happy to see a healthy weekend for her. Of course, tore her ACL in the season opener a year ago. And the big standout from that weekend, Nebraska took down number 6 Tennessee on opening day. Again, that's a team that is going to be competing for an SEC title, going to be competing to go to the Women's College World Series. That win certainly got a lot of folks' attentions. And Nebraska, they couldn't quite close it out as they wanted. Blew a late lead against Texas Tech, and then a big inning against Mississippi State sunk them 2 ranked teams to beat them. But Huskers still up to number 18 in the coaches poll. They are, again, amongst those top national powerhouses, and they'll be back at it this weekend. Troy Cox Classic, Nebraska softball in action. But of course, I think that will do it for all of our updates around Nebraska athletics. I appreciate all of you tuning in for our discussion today about John Cook, about the future of Nebraska volleyball. Whether it's that, our spring sports that are ongoing, or any other updates, they will all be there online for you at journalstar.com. But that'll do it for today's Life in the Red podcast. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's Life in the Red podcast. Our theme music is composed by Sasha Indy. The stories continue on journalstar.com.